You guys can hear me? It's working? Well, hello, good afternoon. We saved the best for last. We actually canceled the rain and scheduled the sunshine just for this panel. Major kudos to our MC for pronouncing my name. My name is Aisuluu. I lead data-driven experiences and audience strategy for L'Oreal. But I actually, fun fact, I only go by my first name in my professional life as well. I have a little joke saying it's a mononym like Beyonce and Bono. I'm only $500 million poorer. So this year's season will be defined less by flash and more by precision. Shoppers are planning earlier, they're hunting value, increasingly using AI for discovering and researching and making decisions on for their purchases. So this gives marketers a very clear mandate. Get faster testing, right? Scale what works, and invest in where measurement proves impact. So we got an amazing group of panelists here on stage, and each of them brings a different piece to a puzzle. We have a brand loyalty, we have investment and media activation, we have strategy, and first-party data at scale. So over the next 35 minutes, I want us to focus on practical moves, where to place bets, how to move with speed, and how to prove that smarter spend actually makes business impact. So let's jump into it. And Alison, I would love to start with you. Vera Bradley is such a distinct brand and has such a loyal customer base. And I know a little bit that you guys are also going through brand refresh. So I'm curious, how are you rethinking engagement with the consumer this holiday season to not just connect with consumers meaningfully, but also compete on value?
It's a good question. I will just give a little bit, for those that aren't familiar, just a little bit of context relative to our holiday strategy based on what we have been going through as a company. So after probably over a decade, the company had sort of been on a decline and came in and said, we're going to really do a rebrand and a restoration of this brand. And that launch was about a year ago, July. So there's been a lot of work that's been taking place. One of the things, we have a full line business, and then we also have an outlet business. And part of that restoration process was really distinguishing between those two. Because as we know with retailers, once you start that discounting, that can continue. And so over time, there really had been a difference between the two as much as there should be from a brand value standpoint. I am going somewhere with this based on holidays, so stay with me. But essentially, what we were doing is needing to differentiate between the two. So we really were in a position this year in particular, after last year rebooting, needing to continue to refill our entire funnel. So from a brand standpoint, we have a lot of people that were on the full line brand side of things, but they were buying things at a deep, deep discount. And so what we needed to do was sort of migrate them over to our outlet business, and then that left us with a pretty empty funnel for our brand and full line business. So we've been in the process of continuing to add more, which takes that whole full funnel mix and top. So for our holiday, it actually started really in a big way in August and September. That's where we did our major brand activation campaign, because we really needed to fill that funnel prior to holiday. So by the time we were in holiday, this would already be where people have maybe got reconnected to the brand, and we could really work on more of the consideration and the conversion side of things. So for us, we did a major PR activation. We created a short film. We did a lot of activation with also some influencers that were really leaning into this nostalgia and this Y2K nostalgia that was taking place. So that was basically our holiday strategy. Yes, it definitely helped August and September as well, but it was really about how are we filling that funnel for all of the execution of more of the consideration and conversion during the holiday time period, and at a much more affordable price when we think about things, just because it's not as competitive during that time period. So that was a longer setup, but that was really the focus for our holiday, was to get as many people into that funnel for that time period.
So that's a little bit on the brand side, and let's zoom out, look at the strategy. So I want to kick it to Ed, and Ed, from a strategy perspective, what are the biggest friction points in the holiday journey that marketers either underestimate or that still surprise brands? And how would you prioritize fixing them?
I think it's a great question. I think there are friction points for all of us in terms of how we think about the holiday season. Most of them probably come between when there's like an expectation and a perception that doesn't quite match up with reality. If I think about my own kids, there is an expectation that Santa is real, and one day the reality will hit them that he's not quite there. And anytime there's a gap between the stories that we're telling and then the experience that we're actually capable of delivering in the real world is always going to be a challenge. I think for us, we particularly see those gaps when there are stories that we're telling through paid media, broad awareness messaging that we then can't deliver on the actual experience, checkout, conversion, and life cycle side of things. And so I think particularly as we move through this season, we're seeing clients increasingly focus on how do you bridge those gaps between what's going on in terms of our media spend, in terms of the messaging that we could deliver in the holiday season, and then what's actually happening on the activation side of things, all the way through the checkout, through to conversion, and the relationship that we're bringing people into. And as Alison said, if you're showing up in the 12th month of the year with something that's totally discordant from what you've been doing in the previous 11 months, then you're probably going to have a problem. And so, yes, I think for all of us in perpetuity, we're saying holidays creeping earlier and earlier and earlier. But the reality is that the life cycle, how we're filling the funnel and how we're priming throughout the course of the preceding 11 months is kind of critical to be able to bridging some of those gaps that we're seeing. I think the other component of that as well is not just kind of what's happening in the preceding 11 months, but what's happening next year. So we're increasingly seeing people focusing on holiday season as the hot start for 2026, basically. When we think about the year we've all been through and the amount of turmoil, churn, the uncertainty, macroeconomic conditions, I think if we're not using holiday this year as an opportunity to get a head start in terms of de-risking 2026, making sure that media investment can go further and that it isn't just going to a click that happens to a basket in December, but it's actually leading to a conversion, an activity which is going to sustain us through Q1 and into 2026 well, then we're probably going to have an issue next year.
Love it. Love the last notion. And actually, you're making me think. So I want to have a follow-up question for you, because you talked about bridging the message and activation. And I'm curious, what role should creative play
I think that
in a season where discounts compete with differentiation? I
mean, I think that creative is obviously integral in terms of being able to actually drive the impact that we want to have. And I think that for me, this season is one that is like a real kind of paradox between there are kind of like broad cultural signifiers that we can also all buy into, but it's also like incredibly unique and personal for each of us. Like I think about my own like holiday season. I am a British expat living in Brooklyn with 2 American kids, with a Jewish wife, and what holiday is going to look like for me has got real nuance and intimacy and kind of interest in terms of the cultural cues, signifiers, all these kind of things. But it's wrapped up in it's wrapped up in all of the big thematic things we think about the season. But the brands in my life that can connect to me in a really personal way with those specific cues and what I'm thinking about in that season, with all that nuance going on in my life, which I'm sure is reflective for everyone here in terms of the way they think about their own holiday season and what the important components of that are for them, is super important in terms of being able to manifest that creatively. And so thinking about the content that we're putting into market with a layer of intelligence, so we're able to understand not just what's working, but ultimately why it's working with those people and how it's connecting through to their own individual drivers, I think is super important.
Love it. And so that's on the strategy piece, right? And once we have that strategy in place, then the question becomes, how do we invest smartly and we move faster in the market? So Bryan, I want to kick to you. What's your take on where, and I am very curious about this question myself because it's part of my job, is what's your take on where media dollars are performing the best this season? You name it, retail media, programmatic, CTV, audience-first partnerships. What do you think?
Yeah, I admit I want to build on what Alison was saying because I think it's really in line with what we're seeing. But one of the unique parts of my role is sitting across our SEO, CRM, and our paid channels and teams. And I think this time of year in particular, understanding every single one of those consumer touch points and how you're optimizing for them, ideally, what you're doing in SEO and what you're doing in CRM is actually making your paid, your kind of more conversion-based paid media more effective, allowing you to push those dollars up into new customer acquisition during what is a very cluttered time of year, which kind of gets to what Alison was saying, which is how do we start earlier and kind of lean into more video and brand storytelling formats. We talk a lot with our clients about how do we optimize those own channels so that and leverage the information that we're getting from that, so that we're constantly looking at our paid as a new customer acquisition strategy. And the other thing that I think is notable here is when every brand is going to have different retailers or marketplaces that represent different share of their distribution. I think making sure that you're not goaling based on where you want a transaction to happen during the holidays, but recognizing that consumers are going to transact where is best for them. One of the strategies that we're really leaned in on is how do we leverage social platforms to create momentum and discovery, even though we're not expecting a transaction to occur, leading into major sales moments on large marketplaces and in brick and mortar. So rather than treating every dollar like it has to convert immediately, knowing that we can kind of start earlier using different platforms to really kind of create relevance and try and capture a greater share rather than waiting until most dollars are hitting in mid-November to the days leading into Christmas. So I think the combination of those things is really interesting. And again, when we're optimizing effectively across SEO and CRM and looking at what is the true incremental outcomes from lower funnel branded search, et cetera, what we're finding is that oftentimes there's a pretty healthy budget that can be pushed up into more of that awareness or consideration type of media. And how a lot of the marketplaces operate today, you're actually looking at what is that new to brand, what is that path to purchase, how does some of that more brand building type of media actually convert down into sales, not just over a 3, 6, 12-month period, but during the holiday season. So that's what we're really interested in pushing for, is trying to bring these channels together and recognize that every touch point that you have with a consumer should be valued and should inform the next decision that you make of how to reach them.
I think you touched upon something a lot of marketers loved hearing, that not every dollar has to convert immediately. But it's also a tough message, I think, to deliver to the C-suite. So follow-up question, how do you, can you double click into maybe the measurement piece, or how do you justify?
Yeah.
Do you have any insights and tips for marketers how to balance that line?
Sure. So, I mean, we do a lot of, match market testing and other types of incrementality type measurement programs where we specifically are looking at the impact of longer form video and other more brand building type of formats that we can target. Because we're not trying to prove that something works today. We're trying to prove over time that when you actually pull those dollars out of market, to what Alison was saying earlier, you start to dry up what is your pipeline, and it actually becomes more expensive for you to convert at the lower end of the funnel. So a constant strategy of looking at measuring the incrementality of your upper funnel investments tied back to actual either directly to sales or signups or whatever the metric is. I think that's critical, and it also speaks to what you were saying, which is it's not something you start doing in November. It's something that ideally you're doing consistently, so you're able to continue to make the case for the value that's being driven through those investments.
I'll just build on that too, in that one of the ways, I definitely agree with everything that you said. In addition, I also put in quarterly brand awareness studies, which seems a little bit of an overkill to do that from a quarterly standpoint, but in the midst of a turnaround, and then being able to really attach the results to what we did in those 3 months prior was very needed for us, and particularly from a board perspective as well, not being as close to it, what have you, is like we were actually able to say, like, look what is happening from a brand awareness standpoint, what is happening from a brand consideration. Like sometimes you really do have to go back and look at it from that perspective, which for us has been vital, because otherwise it's very difficult, as we know, to sell the upper funnel items.
I want to kick to Jim and switch gears a little bit, because T-Mobile's first-party data gives you such a unique visibility into consumer mobility across channels. And what insights are you seeing this season? How should brands think about using carrier data for both reach, what we're talking about here, and measurement during the season while staying privacy compliant?
Sure. Well, first of all, I don't know about you, but I want to go to Ed's house for the holidays, because that sounds like a lot of fun.
And it's the best.
Party
It's the best.
in Brooklyn. Well, you touched on a couple of things, so I'll start with the privacy piece of it first, because that's so important to everybody. So yes, we are a telco, a carrier, so that privacy-centric position is really important to us. When you lose that trust with the consumers, and it's all over. So that said, we do have access to 130 million subscribers. We know what apps are on their phone. We know how they're using those apps, and I'd argue that's about the best first-party data in terms of determining who somebody is and what their behaviors are. So that's great for targeting and identifying audiences. So the way we think about that around the holidays is when you look at shopping behaviors and habits, you can tell if it's a family, if it's somebody who's single, if there's a sports fan. So all of those cohorts are available, for marketers to be able to say, this is who I want to reach. And then, when you're able to target them, interestingly, people tend to think that we only sell ads on mobile phones, which is not the case. We acquired a DSP called Bliss, so we have an omnichannel Magenta audience network across CTV and OLV and display. Not to turn it into a total sales pitch, but I'm a sales guy. So you can reach these consumers using that data across all of those different channels. So that's really our approach to Q4 and to holiday.
I was smiling about the sales comment. I think it's the right time, right? Yeah. Like, it's not either or. It can be both. You can
put a salesperson on a panel and you give them a microphone, you're going to get a pitch.
Exactly. You can share insights and you can sell at the same time.
You're truly living the brand as well, not just with the shirt, but the sneakers, which is incredible.
And follow-up question to you, Jim. Is there any one quick win you would recommend marketers try with carriers this season that's realistic to execute before the season?
Yeah, sure. I'll speak on behalf of all the carriers, but I'm going to say that T-Mobile does it best, and that's app installs. So I don't care what business you're in. You want people to have your app. You want to engage with your app. You want them to interact with the app. We activate about 2 million devices every single month, and you have the ability to get that app on someone's phone. And then you're also able to use the cross-channel that I mentioned to then re-engage those customers and get them to actually use the app, because about 70% of people download an app and then they stop using it within 3 weeks. So I would say for a marketer, you want a quick win for the holiday, it's get your app on people's phones and get them engaged with your app.
Can I just add that if you don't need, if the app that you're looking for folks to download doesn't necessarily have to be done before the holiday, that last week of the year is a very, very efficient time to buy media. And I would always recommend, if there's work that your brand can do in those last 6 days of the year, it's a great time to be in market. So whether that the holiday happens, phones are being sold, people are unboxing, they've got a new phone, that's a great time to get in and get some great efficiencies on the media. And also you have people who are kind of settled in a little bit.
Did you want to add that?
Well, I was just going to add, there's also a ton of media, as a media sales guy for almost 40 years, people are trying to hit their numbers and fill their budgets at the end of the year, so you can get some good media efficiencies at the end of the year as a marketer or a buyer.
Sure. In my upfront, I did say about practical moves, and this is very practical. I hope the audience is taking notes. I want to come back to Alison, if you don't mind, because from my retail background and when I was in retail, I'm always curious, how are you protecting margins while also balancing the promotionality of Cadence and while helping consumers discover their gifting ideas, etc.?
Yeah, again, given our position where we are right now in terms of rebuilding some of that brand equity on our full line side, we really have had to think differently about that. We've focused a lot on price points versus discounts. But I think more than anything, and we're lucky that we're not a commodity per se, is just really focusing on that uniqueness, and people will really place that value on the uniqueness. And so if you don't get into that discussion about how inexpensive something can be and focus much easier said than done, because when you look around and everybody's at 50, 60, X% off with free shipping or what have you, it is very, very hard. But those are some of the areas that we've been focusing on, is just what is that unique gift aspect, and then what are more of the price points, given where everything with tariffs and what have you have taken place. It's extra challenging, but I think that you'll see a lot of like gifts under this, gifts under that, versus discounts, because a lot of retailers just cannot do it at this point in time this year.
Clearly, we cannot have a panel or any kind of conversation without mentioning AI. So I am going in that direction. Alison, still with you. Curious if Vera Bradley is experimenting with any of AI tools to improve that discovery and the gifts that you're talking about.
Yeah, so I'd say right now we're very much in the use of it from an efficiency standpoint, and being able to do a lot of some of the more heavy lifting things that we would then be able to free up our time to focus much more on the creativity. So we are doing a lot of things relative to copy and relative to photos and things of that nature that are much more, again, the task side that allows us to focus more on the creative aspect and strategy.
I think across our client base, there's various clients at various levels of maturity in terms of how they're activating AI, and people are doing a lot of the obvious things in terms of generative creation of assets, that kind of thing. Let's come back to what Alison was saying about kind of the holiday season. We have some of the more interesting use cases we have is a lot of clients looking at things like price elasticity, how can they get out of sort of, detox their customer base from being overly reliant on promotional mechanics, particularly through the holiday season. There's always going to be a component there when we're trying to drive volume at the end of the year, and there's going to be a necessity with some audiences. But the ability to prove out a return back to the business, if we're able to shift away from that, even if it's just for segments or subsegments of audiences, we're seeing lots of work going on right now in terms of how we're able to use AI-driven activations to build some of those more sophisticated models which can identify those people who ultimately we don't need to overserve some of those promotional mechanics to. And as you say, if we can prove out some of that stuff through Q4, where maybe we are a little bit more heavily dependent on some of those promotional devices to make sure we make numbers at the end of the year, then it sets us up really well up for 2026. And so that's where some of the more interesting AI use cases I think are coming through, is less on the generative side and more on the business intelligence and model-driven activation side.
Bryan, anything from you? Because you mentioned, you talked about stitching SEO, CRM, programmatic, and any interesting use cases from you on that side?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a lot of stuff going on right now with everything in the AEO, GEO, acronym soup space, helping. I think a lot of the work that we're seeing come across right now is just even trying to help brands understand the metrics that matter as they're looking to understand, share of model and how should they be thinking about prompts. And now there's brand or companies who are bringing contextual advertising into some of the space outside of ChatGPT, and so a lot of it is just helping navigate with that. We've rolled out some really interesting tools with our email product that help us accelerate the versioning that you can do in that space, and also create more personalization. And I think one of the interesting things we're doing as well, which when time gets tight, is we do a lot in like the persona development space. So being able to ingest kind of whatever brand information, brand guidelines, historical studies into our persona products, and actually be able to talk to simulated consumers, show them ads, get some more real-time feedback on kind of asset testing. So it's kind of a suite of things that we're using that's not necessarily about being faster. I think it's about being able to your point, kind of connect more of the points together, and then have our teams be able to articulate the so what, the why. How does that feed into shifts in strategy or optimizations or things that maybe historically we wouldn't have had time to do. So we're kind of exploring across the board and seeing areas where it's doing really well, areas where we're continuing to evolve.
Just a quick follow-up. I'm curious what kind of clients of yours are faster to jump on this test versus who is slower? And you don't have to name names.
No, I won't.
Industry.
I won't name names. I mean, some of our clients have been around for over 100 years. Some are born in tech, and I think many of them are larger enterprise type of organizations where what we're finding is there's a huge appetite to explore the tool and the use case, but actually the thing that often gets a little bit lost is the change management that's required. A lot of the systems, tools, and processes that have been in place to run these different types of programs in the past aren't directly translatable when you're trying to adapt for leveraging more AI-based tools. And so we're really trying across our client base to also focus on what does the change management require? What are the things that you've been doing forever that are just fundamentally have to change because that template won't work anymore, and we have to figure out a new way of doing it. So it's been fun, but yeah, it's been legacy brands who've been around for a long time, tech companies. We're seeing a lot of folks leaning in across the board. Beauty brands.
We have a few minutes left, so I want to open up to all of you if you have any final thoughts before I close us off.
I would love to hear from you. You haven't answered some of these questions, and so from your perspective.
So the tricky part, the reason I'm a moderator, not a speaker, is because it's L'Oreal is very strict on public speaking guidelines. Honestly, I've been biting my tongue not to jump in with my perspective or my experience and my insights, but I remind myself that I'm
Okay, fair.
That's why I'm happy to do it afterwards over, I don't know, a good cup of coffee, tea, drinks. Yes, in any order. Anything? Any final thoughts? And I'll bring us home afterwards.
I think it's been a long year. I think that all been coping with some challenging macro circumstances that we all had to deal with. I think hopefully holiday is going to be a bright note at the end of the year for as many of us as possible. Set us up for a good 2026. A lot of that involves making the right foundations through holiday to ensure that we're connecting everything that we're doing and not just treating it as kind of a one-time drop in the bucket, but setting us up successfully for what's going to be hopefully a happy and profitable 2026.
I would encourage marketers to try something new. Would be my thing for Q4, and that's easy for me to say. I mean, T-Mobile is certainly not the first thing that comes to people's mind when they think about necessarily the biggest advertising partner. And just because something you've done in the last couple of years or the last 3 years doesn't mean you should do it again. We used to have a joke that we would say, which was that nobody ever got fired for recommending last year's media plan, and that's kind of sad. So I would just encourage folks there's so many more choices out there. There's so many more opportunities to just try something that you haven't done and don't be afraid to fail at it.
Yeah, I love that. There's a lot out there right now, and yeah, maybe it's something that I try to talk to my team about a lot. Is rather than trying to be experts and great at everything, let's try and understand what our focus is. I think it's very hard to lose focus given all that goes on, and so. Yeah, I think the next 2.5 months provide folks an opportunity to be what is actually important from a professional standpoint to accomplish before the end of the year and really try and deliver that. I think it's nice to go into the holidays feeling like you hit a milestone. So.
Well, with that, we're almost coming to an end. And what I loved about this conversation today is that it's how it came in full circle. We talked about brands, we talked about brand equity, we talked about strategy, we talked about execution, some practical tips, we talked about measurement. And I absolutely not opposed to the idea of quarterly brand awareness studies, absolutely not. So thank you, Alison, Ed, Bryan, Jim, for such sharp thinking. Thank you so much, everybody.
And Ed. Oh, you forgot Ed. You forgot Ed. We're going to have the party at his house for the holidays.
Oh, yes. Thank you, everybody in the audience for full engagement. And if you take anything away today, so I'm sure you took away your own insights, but something I took away from myself is one, start early, plan early. Do not let your pipeline dry up before holidays. Not every dollar has to convert immediately. Break autopilot, if I can paraphrase, Jim, your notion. Break autopilot and understand why it worked, and if it worked or if it works. So with this, here's to a season defined not by bigger budgets, but by smarter and more inspired marketing. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Television.